My family signed over their company for $75 billion, then told me to disappear, but they forgot who actually held the keys to the technology. My father said it like he was reading the day's headlines. We are transferring all $75 billion to your brother. Then he turned to me, eyes flat. And you are done here. My mother smiled without warmth. My older brother adjusted his tie, already looking past me. I could hear the faint buzz of the overhead lights as I asked the one thing no one expected. So you finalized the sale without my approval on the patents? Mom let out a small, dismissive laugh. We sold what belonged to us. But across the conference table, the lead buyer stopped writing. He set down his pen, closed his folder, and looked straight at my father. And in that silence, I realized they hadn't just cut me out. They had made a catastrophic mistake. Before I get into everything, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Have you ever had people close to you underestimate what you were truly holding? Because that's the exact miscalculation my family was about to make. Nearly a decade before any of this reached a breaking point, our company felt intimate. The Austin office smelled of stale coffee, toner, and the lemon cleaner the janitorial team used on the tables. My father, Michael, wore the same maroon tie to every meeting with investors. My mother kept framed photographs of us on her desk. And Henry, my brother, could charm anyone in a room within 60 seconds. I was different. In my late 20s, I chose the quiet of the lab over the noise of the crowd. I kept my hair tied back, wore simple jackets, and always had a worn leather journal next to my computer. That journal contained the first ideas, the rough calculations, and the raw diagrams for the automation system that would eventually make our company staggeringly valuable. I remember the moment the prototype first ran. I was exhausted, running on stale coffee, when it adjusted to a problem without crashing. I laughed so hard I nearly cried. Henry took that work to a conference the next week. He was magnetic on stage, I'll admit that. He knew the right pauses, the winning smiles, and how to boil down a complex idea into a soundbite. When someone asked who designed the system, Henry glanced to the back of the room where I stood. For just a second, I thought he would point at me. He didn't. My mother squeezed my arm later and said, "Henry needs the spotlight, dear. You hate that sort of thing anyway." I convinced myself she was right. That became the pattern. I created the work. Henry presented it. My father negotiated. My mother managed the narrative. The company grew, and my name seemed to shrink with each success. But there was a detail my family never really examined. Before the company ever sold a product using my designs, I had built the original core system myself, on my own time, using my own savings. A legal specialist had advised me to secure my rights. So I did. I gave the company broad permission to use the technology. But I retained the core patents. And I retained the right to approve any change in control of the business. At the time, it seemed like standard paperwork. Years later, when Henry began slipping into confidential meetings about a huge acquisition and my invitations quietly vanished, I pulled that old journal from my desk drawer. For the first time, I wondered if they had simply forgotten what I owned, or if they were banking on me forgetting it myself. The first time I heard the number, I thought I had misheard. $75 billion. My father mentioned it over dinner, slicing into his steak as if it were just another quarterly report. Henry sat across from me, smirking into his wine. "The buyer sees enormous potential," he said. I noticed he used the word buyer, not partner. Over the following weeks, closed-door meetings multiplied. Henry was copied on every email. I was copied on almost none. Then a document arrived in my inbox. My father called it a simple formality. I opened it at my kitchen counter, coffee cold beside me, my leather journal within reach. The legal jargon was dense, but one sentence stood out. They required my written approval to transfer the technology license with the sale. I read it 3 times. The next morning, my father leaned against my office door. "Just sign it," he said. "Legal needs to tie up loose ends." I asked, "Why am I a loose end?" His smile disappeared. "Don't complicate this." My mother tried a softer approach that evening. She called while I was doing laundry and told me Henry was under tremendous strain. "This is his moment," she pleaded. Please don't make this about ownership. Ownership. As if my patents were just a family squabble instead of legal property. I called Daniel, the person I trusted when my own family made me doubt my judgment. Don't sign anything yet, he advised. Get independent legal advice. I finally felt like I could breathe again. Then, 3 days later, I walked into a restaurant near downtown and saw Daniel laughing with Henry. A contract folder lay between them. Daniel followed me outside and didn't bother to lie. Henry had promised him a major financial role after the deal closed, a huge salary, bonuses, a top-tier position. You knew what they were doing to me, I said. Daniel looked away. That betrayal hurt more than anything else. So I found Claire Morgan. She reviewed the licensing agreement in silence, then turned it toward me and tapped one paragraph. Your family can sell their shares, their equipment, their brand, she said. But they cannot sell your core patents without your signature. I stared at her. What happens if I refuse? Claire leaned back. Then they have a very different company to sell. Something shifted inside me in that moment. I still didn't know the lengths my family would go to, so I decided not to warn them. I wanted to see their next move when they still thought I was too passive to fight. Once I stopped pretending everything was normal, the truth became clear. My calendar was altered first. Meetings I had attended for years vanished without explanation. My access to internal reports was restricted. Henry began walking through the engineering floor with strangers, introducing them as if he had built everything himself. Then my father called me into his office. An envelope sat on his desk. $50,000 he offered. A clean exit. No drama. Inside was a separation agreement. I would resign quietly, approve the transfer, and never discuss my departure. You want my patents for $50,000? His jaw tightened. I want you to stop acting like this company revolves around you. Claire told me not to react emotionally. I didn't. I declined through my lawyer. That's when my mother's whisper campaign began. Subtle at first. Hope is overwhelmed. Hope is taking things too personally. Hope has always struggled with pressure. People who had asked me to solve their toughest technical problems now spoke to me with condescending sympathy, as if I might shatter at any moment. Then came the gala. It was meant to celebrate the upcoming acquisition. The family estate glowed under soft lighting. A jazz band played near the terrace. Investors stood beneath framed portraits of our smiling family. Henry was everywhere, shaking hands, accepting praise. My mother introduced him to one group as the driving force behind our technology. I heard every word. I said nothing. Then I saw Megan, a team member, carrying presentation folders. Henry stopped her loudly. There's a formatting error in these, he announced. Megan flushed. I used the version I was provided. Henry laughed. Maybe engineering needs people who can follow basic instructions. I stepped in. That presentation came from my group. If there's a problem, bring it to me. His smile vanished. You can't stand one night not being the center of attention, can you? I almost laughed at the absurdity. Then he lifted his wine glass. It looked like an accident. It wasn't. Red wine poured across the front of my cream blouse. The room went silent. I felt the cold liquid soak through the fabric. Henry widened his eyes. Hope, come on. It slipped. I looked at my father. He stared at his glass. I looked at my mother. She leaned closer and whispered, Please don't make a scene. Something inside me finally went still. I walked to the restroom and stared at myself under the harsh lights. Red wine. Tired eyes. Years of excuses. I opened my bag. My old leather journal was inside. I ran my thumb over the cover and called Claire. I'm done protecting them. The next morning, all communication went through her. We preserved emails, payment records, meeting logs, access histories, and security footage. Claire formally notified the buyer that I had not given my consent to transfer the patents. My father still pushed toward the finish line. He thought $75 billion made him invincible. Then the final meeting invitation appeared on my screen. I closed my laptop, placed my journal in my bag, and walked toward the boardroom. This time, they had no idea I was carrying the one thing they could not buy. My father was already standing when I entered. Henry sat beside him in a dark suit, one ankle resting casually on his knee. My mother had an untouched coffee cup in front of her. The buyer and their legal team occupied the other side of the table.
Claire took the seat next to me.
My father didn't ask us to sit. We are handing all $75 billion to Henry, he announced. Then he looked directly at me. You are done here. Leave. For a moment, nobody moved. I looked at Henry. He avoided my eyes. I looked at my mother. She seemed almost relieved. So you sold the company without my patents, I said. My mother chuckled. We sold our business. Across the table, the buyer stopped writing. He stood up. Actually, my father's expression shifted. The buyer closed his folder. This deal has not closed. The funds have not been released. And as of this morning, we have a serious ownership issue. My father turned to me. What did you do? Claire answered before I could. Hope did nothing except decline to transfer property she legally owns. She placed the licensing agreement on the table. The buyer's attorney read the marked section. The company had broad rights to use my technology but did not own the core patents, and if control of the company changed, those rights could not transfer without my written consent. The buyer looked directly at me. Did you sign that consent?
No.
Henry shot out of his chair. This is ridiculous. She built it here. Not the original system, Claire said. She placed the ownership records beside the agreement.
Dates.
Filings. Development logs. My leather journal sat quietly in front of me, its edges worn smooth from years of work. My father stared at the papers. Then he tried a different angle. This is a family dispute. Hope is angry because Henry is taking over. Claire slid another document across the table. The separation offer. $50,000 in exchange for her consent, her silence, and her release of claims. The buyer read it, his expression hardening. You tried to terminate the patent owner before closing and conditioned her severance on transferring the asset. My father's voice rose. That's not what happened. It is exactly what happened, I said. Henry slammed his palm on the table. You're holding $75 billion hostage because you're jealous. I finally looked at him. I'm not holding anything of yours, Henry.
His face went red.
This belongs to the family. No, I said. That's what you kept telling yourselves. Claire opened one final folder. After I refused to sign, Henry had hired an outside contractor to find a way into systems containing technology he did not own. There was no dramatic secret recording. There didn't need to be. There were payment records, messages, invoices, access logs, and a contractor who stopped the work, hired counsel, and agreed to cooperate once they realized there was a legitimate ownership dispute. Henry went pale. My father turned toward him. What did you do? I was protecting the deal. The buyer's chair scraped as he stood again. You were creating a massive liability inside a $75 billion acquisition. My mother finally put down her cup. Her hand was shaking. The buyer looked at his attorneys. We're done. My father blinked. What does that mean? It means the conditions have not been met. The acquisition is terminated. No funds will be released. Henry sank slowly back into his chair. $75 billion. Gone before it had ever truly been theirs. My father stared at me as if I had destroyed him. But I hadn't. I had not taken his company. I had not touched his money. I had not sabotaged a single system. I had simply stopped giving my family permission to sell me along with everything else. I picked up my journal. Months earlier, my father had planned to have security escort me out of that same building. This time, I walked through the door on my own. And behind me, for the first time in years, Henry was the one left sitting without an answer. The fallout did not happen overnight. That mattered to me. For years, my family had believed consequences were for other people. But this time, there was no explosion. It came apart piece by piece. First, the buyer walked away. Then the company had to admit that the technology at the heart of its valuation could not be transferred as promised. Investors withdrew. Lenders asked harder questions. Contracts that once seemed secure were suddenly reviewed. The company was still worth something, just nowhere near what my father had convinced himself it was worth. Within months, Michael Bennett was no longer in charge. He resigned after legal disputes, debt, and pressure from people who had once treated him like a genius. My mother took it worse. She had always controlled the story. She knew who to call, what to say, which version of events made us look flawless. But legal records are stubborn. So are emails and meeting notes. Once the facts became public, people stopped repeating her version of me. Hope was emotional because she refused to sign away her patents. Hope was difficult because she asked for independent advice. Eventually, the narrative changed too. Hope had protected property she legally owned. For the first time, my mother could not edit the story. Henry lost his position not long after. The access issue became part of a formal investigation, and the people involved had their own lawyers. I stayed out of it. Claire handled what needed handling. I did not call reporters. I did not celebrate when companies stopped returning his calls. The truth was enough. Daniel reached out 6 months later. We met at an old coffee shop where we used to study together. He looked older, tired. "I made the wrong choice," he said. I stirred my coffee. "Yes." He swallowed. "I thought the deal was certain." "I know. I was scared of being left behind." That almost made me smile. So was I. He looked at me then, perhaps realizing how hollow that excuse sounded. "I want to fix this." I shook my head. "I don't hate you, Daniel." His shoulders loosened. "But I don't trust you either." They tightened again. I left before he could turn an apology into another negotiation. By then, Megan and I were building something new.
Smaller. Cleaner.
Every engineer's name stayed attached to their work. Every inventor knew what they owned. Every agreement was explained before anyone signed. When I gave our first major presentation, I carried my old leather journal onto the stage. I didn't need it anymore. I wanted it there. A reminder of the woman who once stood in the back of a room while someone else accepted applause for her work. Almost a year later, my mother contacted me. My father's health had failed. There were medications, medical bills, appointments they couldn't cover. She asked for money. I sat with the message for a long time. Then I called Claire. "Verify the bills. Pay the essential medical expenses directly." Claire paused. "And your parents?" "They don't get access to me." I did not send cash. I did not demand an apology. I did not reopen the door. That evening, I stood by the windows of my new office looking over Austin when Megan called from the conference room. "They're ready for you, Hope." I picked up the leather journal. This time, when I walked into the room, nobody was waiting for Henry. They were waiting for me. I used to think family loyalty meant staying quiet, giving more, and forgiving faster. I was wrong. Love does not give anyone ownership over your work, your future, or your peace. Henry lost a $75 billion deal, but that was never my real victory. My victory was walking away without needing my family to admit what they had done. Sometimes the strongest boundary is simply refusing to return to the place that broke you. If this story hit home, tell me in the comments. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to like and subscribe to Zarabell Stories for more tales about reclaiming your power.